Alberto, man, thanks for joining podcast.
Hey, it's been a minute, man. I think, yeah, last time we hung out, we were playing basketball.
Wow, that was actually true. I haven't played basketball in a while because it's a lockdown here in Ireland. You can't play basketball outdoors; it's just raining all the time. So, and there's not many outdoor courts because it's not a huge. When your average height is like 5'9", it's not a huge sport. So, indoors with the whole situation, they've locked it down. So, actually, the government had said that we could play basketball outdoors if each player had their own basketball. So just like standing around bouncing a ball at circle. So,
Oh
uh,
wow, so you can do the warm up part, and that's kind of it, right?
yeah, just layups. Um, yeah, but yeah, it's good to chat to you again, man. And I don't know if I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you before, but I remember when I first got into bodybuilding. I think I probably got into the untested bodybuilding first. Uh, I'd say at least 11 years ago. So when I was 17, maybe 16, when I started first Googling natural bodybuilding, the forums, I don't know how I stumbled across the forums on bodybuilding.com. And I know that you were big on that. I remember reading back, and it's almost like they're actually not timeless because I tried to read through them recently, and it's like bodybuilding.com's archived their forums or something like that, which makes it really difficult to read back through. But at the time, they're timeless because I was reading through preps of yourself, Eric, I would think was called Quelly. Um, Father Flex was yours, which is pretty easy to remember. I can't remember what Jeff's was. It was like ST or 8B or something.
His
Something like
name
that.
backwards is basically his
Ah,
last name backwards, so it's Strebla.
right. Yeah, Strebla. Yeah, so it would be better if he picked Father Flex or something. And then Paul, I remember Paul Ravella as well. But I remember just reading through those things, and it's crazy just to think about how technology has evolved, like me being able to talk to you now, because I remember when I was maybe 17, I used to read through the muscular development. So I cheated a little bit on bodybuilding.com and used to also spend a lot of time in muscular development where the bros hang out, the not really natural bodybuilding, but it was interesting, and it's kind of strange when I think about it. I had like friends online who I've never met, and some of the guys are probably like, I was 17, they're probably like late 30s. Um, but it was cool all the same. But I remember I used to go through every single forum, and I did this specifically with Lane Norton's thing. I think I tabbed through like 300 pages of his Q&A just to read through every single one. But I remember the first time I think Jay Cutler had a Q, like a thread or whatever, and I don't know what I wrote to him as many people did, and he responded. It's probably something like "Thanks, man" or something. But I was like shocked. I was like, "Wow!" I've been looking at his pictures in Flex magazine, and then when I got a bit more hardcore muscular development, and then he's responded to me. It's like, that's insane. And now just with technology, like, I don't know if I get Jay Cutler on the podcast, but you get what I'm saying. I can have this conversation with you now, which before it was just crazy. But yeah, it's great the way technology has been able to connect people like this, especially natural bodybuilding. Because when I first got into bodybuilding, and I know my mother doesn't listen to this podcast, but I remember when I was like 16, I used to get her to buy the Flex magazines because I was embarrassed because I didn't actually know anybody in the whole country that liked bodybuilding. I just don't know why I really liked it, but I just did. And I was so embarrassed to buy them in the bookstore or the magazine shop because I never saw anyone else buy one. So I get my mother. But now that I think about it, like at the time, what is she, 40 something, a 40 something year old woman buying like a picture of Johnny Jackson on the front, like in the Speedos, like doing fake weights. It's crazy. But anyway, man, it's good to chat to you again. And I saw something on your podcast. Before we get into the topic, let's talk a bit about you. So I know obviously who you are, but for those who don't know who you are, and they probably don't have a clue what I'm talking about here, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been lifting since 1999, um, and I've been bodybuilding since 2007. So um, like most people, it's kind of a slow, confusing start. But I got saved by the science, man. Like that's for sure. And yeah, I think maybe like 2, 3 years after my first show, we kind of formed our company, 3D Muscle Journey, which is composed of Alberto Nunez, Eric Helms, Jeff Alberts, Andrea Valdez, and all of a sudden, like, this is what I wake up and do every single day. So going back to, you know, your beginnings, I remember, I was buying Men's Health magazine at first, and then at a certain point, Men's Health just didn't cut it. I'm just like, I'm looking for more than just like to build muscle to get laid, you know, and muscular development, and then like Flex magazine, and then the forums, and yeah, I've built a career from this sport, and I've made some really tremendous friends. So very thankful for what it's given me, and the cool part about natural bodybuilding, here I am, man, closing in, like, I'm almost 38 years old, and the fact that, like, things are kind of getting started for me, like, that's I view it like I don't know, like a soccer player being like 26, 27. It's like, okay, here comes your prime time, which can last for a long time as well. So the fun's not going to stop anytime soon, and that's I mean, that is so dope. Like, I don't know, man, I'll probably, like, the day after I go to the gym and, I don't know, squat like 315, I'll probably like die the next day at 80 something. You know, like, that's, to me, that's like, damn, that's not a whole lot of hobbies like this one, man. And I enjoy doing it, enjoy educating, and talking about this like we will here today.
Yeah. You're a pro natural bodybuilder as well. So I didn't think you mentioned that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing you back on the stage. It's been a while, right? 2014, I believe.
17, which is still going to be the longest off season ever for me, man. That's time flew, man.
Are you itching to get back on the stage, or I know that you don't want to give it time, but, like, are you mentally ready?
Yeah, I'd say, honestly, that last prep was so fun that it wasn't for the sake of progression. Like, honestly, I could have done another prep like 4 or 5 months later. Like, you just learn to make them less invasive with time, you know. And but yeah, I am beyond ready. It's just, I think next year a little bit of a scheduling thing. It's like, so what show will actually? I just don't want to, you know, be promised like this is the road to El Dorado, and like I get there.
I seen that. I actually seen that recently, like with the like we just talked a little bit off there. I'm a big fan of just open bodybuilding, or whatever you want to call it, untested bodybuilding, IFBB bodybuilding, and like the open class. And I follow, like, I don't really watch much YouTube videos, but I do like to watch, like, Dave Palumbo's channel. I've always followed him a long time, and Nick's Strength of Power, actually fairly recent. I just really love watching the freaks, and you see with Big Ramy, he can't compete because he got COVID-19, and now he's got, like, he can't travel to Chicago to do the show, which is the last qualifier before Olympia. And if, like, other people place, then, you know, in the points rankings, which they introduced a few years ago, then he's not going to be at the Olympia, and he wasn't there last year either. But it's interesting to see that, like, those open bodybuilders or untested bodybuilders, they compete, like, some of them compete twice a year, like, and not 2 shows together. Like, they'll compete in Arnold Classic in March-ish, and then at the end of the Olympia. And it's just crazy how much they can compete and actually make improvements. But obviously there's reasons for that, and we're not going to touch on that. But today we really want to talk about something that you mentioned on your story the other day, and it was about, and this is really bodybuilding, you know, focus. So if you don't like bodybuilding, you're probably not going to like this. But I know that people do like bodybuilding. Listen to this. So it's the most important pose. So number one, I guess, you know, what's bodybuilding? You know, I think untested and tested bodybuilding are judged on the same criteria, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, can you talk us a little bit through that, and then the posing's role in that, and then, you know, the topic specifically of the most important pose and what you actually mean by that, and then we'll go a bit more in depth into how to actually improve that pose.
Yeah, so the criteria, it's the same, and I find it to kind of be the same through, like, all divisions. Like, even if we're talking about bikini, it's kind of, you know, like, or at least over time, like, even all new divisions kind of trend in that direction, right? Because that seems to be the cleanest way to figure out the situation on stage. So let me start off with I think same criteria, but I think one of the reasons they're judged so differently is because the big IFBB guys, they really don't make them hold poses like all that long.
Mm.
Like these guys are just behemoths, you know. So to ask a 250-pound like depleted dude like to stay in a front relax for, you know, upwards of 2 minutes, the way like sometimes we have to, um, just they
Do you
don't.
think that's because there's quite a bit, like I think I'm of a pretty good eye for men's bodybuilding, at least to say, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you think it's because they're so big that the variance is, there's a greater, what's the word I'm looking for, but there's a greater margin of between each, because they're so big. You know, if you've got 5 middleweights that are you know, 175 pounds each or whatever, 160 pounds, and then you got, like, you know, you got big Rami's 290, then you've got Phil Heath, 250, you got Brandon Curry's 240. Like, it's kind of easy to, they don't have middleweight classes in the IFBB pro division, so they have the 212 and all. They're just like kind of hobbit versions. But do you think that's the reason why?
Because
It's just easier to see the difference.
um I think it's honestly that this they don't hold that pose nearly as long, because to me
Yeah.
that pose is so like that pose is where, you know, as big as Rami is, like you could see that Phil Heath just has a much more pleasant bone structure, and that when you look at frame to muscle ratio, like Phil just, he's more muscular. Like it sounds funny to say, but he's the more muscular guy. Like Sean Creed is a great example of this super tiny frame, but he's
Mm.
so freaking muscular, you know. Um, Lee Priest was kind of the same way, where it's like, man, that's a small dude, but there's so much muscle. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just the fact that, yeah, you know, they don't have to hold their poses nearly as long. They don't make them do that. I think in the IFBB, honestly, they just go to the area where there's the most muscle on the human body, and that's going to be the poses from the rear. Um, so like literally from that pose, I think you can see everything. You can see just who's the most muscular. You can still kind of see how wide their waist are, or how wide or how narrow they are. Conditioning. So I think at the end, honestly, they almost just, the Olympia, like as long as I can remember, has been like a back lat spread pose. Like from the old Jay and Ronnie days, it's like this was it. Like you knew if you were a Jay guy, a Jay fan, that this is the pose where he
Yeah.
needs to, like, you know, like come a step ahead if he's going to win. Whereas like in the natural shows, there isn't as much muscle. So the symmetry round, like if you fall behind in the symmetry round, like it's really, really, really hard to come back. So same sport, but just because of the nature of what kind of physiques we're looking at, I think what is most important is slightly different.
Yeah. Just on the back pose. So I've been thinking this recently, and it could be because of the substance that they take or whatever. But you know, if you look at back double bicep from an IFBB pro, and then you look at WNBF Worlds, and say someone who's came in really shredded. I don't think the guy who won last year was like shredded, but there was definitely a few guys shredded, and to the point where you can see pretty much a lot of the fibers in the delts, right on the rear delt. But you rarely see that. If you pull up like a Flex Lewis rear double bicep or Phil Heath, it's just like it's smooth. Like it's like they don't have any definition in their delts. And I'm wondering, like, is that, some people say it's because they don't diet long enough, because they do like 16-week diets. Some people say it's because, you know, they got other substances that they're taking that make them hold a bit more water. But I'm just curious, because even the last bodybuilding show I watched last weekend in Spain, the Europa Pro, the guys who are shredded, or the leanest, they still, their delts just weren't like Brian Whitaker, or they weren't like, I think, you know, Brett Freeman, you know, just, they weren't that, you actually got the separation in the delts, not between the arms and the delts, but in the delts.
Yeah, I'd say that like when you compare, so the front relax, I feel is the most important pose as a natural bodybuilder. But I'd say the second one is probably the back double bicep, just because you're right. There's so much detail in that pose, and then you have the benefits of seeing all the mass from the rear. Honestly, like I've noticed the exact same thing that you have, and it just I'm like, is it just because guys just maybe inject there a lot? Right? And maybe some sort of scar tissues build up. But another thing is, and I can be completely off with that since I haven't been like deeply involved in that that side of the sport, at least not that up close and personal. But also, I've noticed with guys that go the enhanced route, it's almost like they get this, like the best way to describe it. And no offense to these guys, because I think y'all look great in your own way, but it's like almost like pork rind skin. Like it just gets all like thick up here, like especially around the delts. And this really hit me. I remember I went to go get my blood work done at a clinic here where it's one of those like rejuvenation clinics.
Yeah.
And I remember just like waiting in the lobby, and there was like all these like pink dudes with like no arms, but like these massive like traps and like delts.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like, man, you guys are all like pork rindy up here. So,
Maybe
a
the
lot of
whole kind of phrase where like, oh, they got to get thinner skin is actually true, because you do hear that and you're like, oh, shut up. He just needs to get leaner. Like, oh, Regan Grimes, he just needs to thin his skin out. He's 3 days out. Like, no, he's just fat. He's not lean enough. Like, but maybe it makes sense if they have like skin like leather from whatever reason. I don't know.
I
It's
mean,
interesting.
everything grows. That's the
Yeah,
thing. It's like we look at like the effects we want and side effects is like different things, but it's just like they're all side effects. It's just we
yeah,
choose which like because a lot of things are like one thing I've noticed from guys that have started as natural guys and then they go up the other route is like facial structure like changes a whole lot. It's like you get this second dosing of
yeah.
like male sexual, like secondary sexual characteristics. So just everything changes. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some, because skin does look different when someone is using versus not using. So that could be it. But yeah, I've noticed like in regards to the feathering on the delts, you just don't see a whole lot in high level IFBB bodybuilding.
Yeah, it's strange because you do see it in like quads, etc., and stuff, glutes, hamstrings. So tell me, why is the front relaxed pose the most important for natural bodybuilding?
You just can't hide anything in that pose, man. Like what your skeletal structure looks like that's just it's right there. There's nothing you can hide. If you have big, thick arms, you'll be able to see it, man, because you can't press them against your body or anything at that point. You're just
Mm,
out there and exposed. Again, I think iliac crest is when we talk about small waist, that's really what it is. It's like, so how apart are those two bones in your hips? So
yeah,
it tells you everything. When you were up there with Eric at the Mayhem, that was the one pose where I'm like, okay, this is because Eric has really short clavicles, so I was like, okay, this is probably going to be the telling pose. Like if he looks a lot wider than Eric, if Adam looks a lot wider than Eric, then I don't think he can make up that deficit. Because other than that, you guys are pretty similar. And to be honest, I think that's kind of where you build up that separation, and you were able to just kind of keep him at bay through like every other part of the posing rounds. So
mm. So I guess there's not a whole lot that people can do really for that at all. I mean, in terms of your hip to shoulder ratio or whatever, just that traditional V. But what can like somebody do? And because people always get worried about genetics and stuff, and it just stresses them out. And you can only do what you have. I mean, like Eric's been bodybuilding longer than I have, and he's been in the sport longer than I have. So it's like he deserves to do better, but it's just unfortunate that just the structure. And the same with the guy, Kendall, right, who won the Worlds. He's like 25 or something, and he's won it twice. I mean,
Yep.
I've been lifting longer than he's been I've been competing longer than he's been lifting, and I'm still only 28. So, but you know, I'm an amateur, and he's the world pro. So, I mean, what can someone do then in that case? Like, you know, if we're talking about the front pose, and I guess that the most important pose as well is because it's always nearly the default, right? It's always back to like when they're writing scores or talking to each other, it's just back to front relaxed. And front relaxed is not relaxed, right? It's maybe your biceps are relaxed, but everything else is pretty much, it's a pretty tough pose. So what are they looking for when they're looking at that front relax? So obviously they're looking at conditioning still, muscularity, symmetry. So what else is that? It, or you know, is there one that kind of takes preference over another? So you know, someone can't really control their symmetry per se in terms of the shoulder to waist, but maybe they can get bigger quads, or they can get bigger delts, lats. They can definitely control conditioning and muscularity to an extent in the off season. So, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's just such a revealing pose, and I think it can be maybe discouraging for people to hear, but I mean, all sports are genetic, man.
Yeah,
You know, like man, like I've said this before, but I think like LeBron James, by the time he was like 13, he was like just physically like more like just superior than like 99% of men on this planet. You
mm.
know, all sports are like that. I just think with bodybuilding, it's just so perpetual and it's just like there, you know, and there's no wit, you know, it's like, I don't know, like you and
There's
I
not
can,
really skill. There's not a whole lot of skill. I mean, there's
yeah,
weightlifting is a skill, but it's not as complex as you know, being Ronaldo or something. You know, football or LeBron James. I mean, LeBron James is. I'm sure there's plenty of 6'9", 250-pound guys in the States, or 280, but not all of them can play basketball as well. So you can, you know,
yeah, yeah, it's coordinated and all that stuff, right? But yeah, it's like I think any other sport. Like, shoot, if for some reason I signed up for an NBA season, right, just go ruin an NBA team, I'd have some sort of highlights at the end of it, right? It's like there's
yeah,
this like there's this stroke of chance, you know, like we see it like in combat sports every once in a while, where it's like, man,
yeah,
really that one punch that did it, dude, just was right place, right time, and that doesn't exist in bodybuilding.
yeah,
So. Um, yeah, that front
yeah.
pose is just so
Yeah, it's interesting how much genetics do play a role in it, and I really see this when people are talking about, like, you know, guys who are like top natural bodybuilders saying they're not natural. They just like like how big do you think Big Ramy was when he was natural? You know, like 160.
yeah,
Like he's like 290. You know, and it's the same. Like I don't know if you ever heard a guy called Ali G. He did the Borat movie. Have you ever seen that?
yeah. Love
Yeah,
that dude. Yeah,
yeah. I was just watching this really old video. He was interviewing Ben Wallace. He used to play for Detroit Pistons, and he was just it was just like a piss take interview, and he's with NBA fans or players, and he's like, "So how do you maintain your height? Like, what do you do to maintain your height?" And he's like, "What?" It's like, how do I get as tall as you? You know, as if like, but that's what people think in bodybuilding. You know, like, oh, you know, oh, if I want to be as big as Brandon Curry, it's just, yeah, I got to just take a needle in my ass, and then I'm gonna. That's like saying you don't want to be like Ben Wallace if you just, you know, take a needle or something. It's just crazy, but it's a bit off topic. But it's interesting how much genetics play a role. But so then, if someone doesn't have the widest, like, or the best genetics, or the best clavicle structure, or you know, their waist is perhaps a bit wider, what can they do? You know, instead of just kind of lying down and rolling over.
yeah. So you know, again, it's like it is symmetry, conditioning, and muscularity. I still say symmetry is not exactly 33%. You know, there's a lot of guys that because they're so symmetrical and just pretty to look at. It's like, man, like on them, that's like 40% of their score, I feel.
Mm.
Um, so like conditioning, obviously that's the most obvious one. It's because you know we kind of start to lean out further away from our center. So like with quads, is like the higher the definition kind of creeps up, the more conditioned you most likely are. If some guy has like, if you could see a sartorius, you know, it's going all the way down from like right around his knee all the way up into his hip. That dude's probably in like sensational shape. So, so again, conditioning is the first thing you can kind of bank on, and then the next thing would be muscularity. So, and that's one of the reasons that when it comes to, it's so funny because kind of taking it more to the casual lifter, it's like, you know, like I think chicks have it right. It's like chicks going to the gym and it's like I want that peach to be as big as possible, you know. And it's like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. That kind of makes sense. But with like the dudes, it's like we get infatuated for some reason with like this musculature that's on our sternum, and like we go hit it 5 times a week or something like that. When in reality, I think you could have a guy that's kind of like flat chested, but if he has some like really round delts, like that is what kind of like your eyes can't stop like scanning back and forth between them. So that's one of the reasons that, yeah, the lateral head of the delt, I think, is it's very important. And given the way that most people train it, like it's probably one of the movements that, you know, like you're lucky if you see someone do them like with a passing grade at most gyms. So there's a lot of stones left unturned, I think, when it comes to how people train, especially that head directly.
Yep.
So,
And then we'll get into that in a moment, but I guess lats as well, but they have a huge genetic component in terms of where they insert as well, right? So you can have the biggest lats, but if they insert high, it's going to be difficult.
I will say this from the front, the higher attaching lats tend to look a little bit better.
Really?
Martin Daniels, like he's got some super high attaching lats, but like partially because of that, it's like, yeah, it's like they're coming like out of his sartorius almost, and they're going in one direction.
That's true. The same with the Italian guy, Babacar, is that his name?
Yes, yeah. He
Right.
doesn't have classical like.
Yeah, but it's just like they fan out to the side. It's like a cobra almost, you know.
So I guess it's attaching high on your torso, but then low on your humerus. You know, so right.
Yeah. So then I guess into kind of the body parts, and I guess if someone's thinking about this and they're like looking in the mirror and they're like, well, I'm not that wide, or if my waist is not, you know, great. And I think a lot of people who do have that great structure, you almost notice it from day one. They look like they lift, even though they don't have much muscle, if that makes sense. You just see people like, oh, people think they've got a huge back, but it's actually in reality, they just have a small waist and wide shoulders. Because I've seen a few guys in my gym that are young and, you know, they look like they lift, but if you actually think about it, they don't really look like they lift. They just got a great structure. So then, you know, if we're talking about these body parts that are maybe not weaker body parts, but perhaps need to be stronger body parts, you know, in relative terms, they're not weak to their physique, but they need to bring them up to make them a strong part so that they, you know, improve their overall look. How do you program that? What do you do for yourself, your clients? What has worked for you over the years? Have you had any body parts that you've had to bring up and, you know, experienced?
Yeah, and there's definitely there's just body parts that are kind of overrated as a like bodybuilder. Like honestly, like calves for sure. Like I think most people know that. Even forearms, like, you know, like I really like my forearms, but like on stage, like here's traps, even with enhanced guys, like traps are, you really use them on one pose, and most muscular, it's like, yeah, it's a cool pose, but it's not really worth as much as I think people think, you know. So yeah, I think especially with bodybuilding, like when we think to those like golden era physiques, not like golden era Arnold, but like, you know, Steve Reeves times. I think like what made them really flow was their lats and arms. Like if you have some huge lats and some huge arms, like that just, and then obviously the delts, right? I kind of include the delts in the arms. That's just, it's going to make for a very, very pleasing physique. So those are areas that for different reasons almost. It's probably worth becoming very skilled in learning how to maximize like the most out of what you do have. like with the back, the biggest thing is just kind of finding that connection, learning to row properly and do any sort of pulling movement properly. I think that takes most of us a few years. Like, we usually understand how to do other things before we get to that. Arms have their own issue in that they're such a small joint and they're piled on top of all these other joints that it's very easy to kind of redistribute tension via improvising by using other body parts. And then lateral raises kind of a bit of what we see with those other two muscle groups. So I think honestly the first place to go to is like technique, because it's really crazy what you can do. Like I've done it before where I've trained set body part with like a volume junkie at a gym, and typically their quad day or their lower body day, there's like 3 or 4 different sorts of like squat patterns.
Yeah.
And we're halfway through our first exercise and they're like I'm going to have to go down and wait because I lost a third of my reps on my second set. So so being efficient and being lightheartedly lethal when it comes to your rep execution, I think is something that's severely underrated. So it's not a skill sport when you get on stage, but when it comes to really those areas, it absolutely is.
So do you recommend that people like just would they keep the same volume for arms or whatever? And do you have any specific movement patterns do you feel allow people to execute that properly, like a preacher curl versus a barbell curl or something? Or are there certain exercises that you think can really help people make the most out of what they got?
So I think first we scan technique before we add anything. Because like if you were to give me say just the scenario of the perfect split, but how it was all being executed was like really bad, versus like really good form and a really shitty program, I'd say the person with good form and a shitty program is going to make better progress. Like I can say that with a good amount of certainty. So I think first thing is like, let's make sure this is all being done right before we go adding some more shitty work in there. So with arms, I think one thing that really helps me, and this is something that I think was started by a friend of mine that is actually, come to find out, it's like 20-30 minutes. He lives 20-30 minutes from me. Kasim Hansen. He was, I think the cue is when it comes to arms, it's like, hey, you try to bring, because I do think internal cueing for that one is super important, more so than other places. The insertion of the muscle closer to the origin. And like when I lift in that manner and I view it that way, it's just crazy. I start to look a little bit more like Jeff Alberts on my arm movements. Because that's the one thing you'll see about Jeff. Like you could look at Jeff and be like, yo, I curl more than him. Jeff's weak. But it's because he is so damn good at just making sure the load is only on his arms. I'm sure Jeff could cheat curl 80, 90-pound dumbbells if he wanted to. But, like Jeff is just so precise. And even when he gets into those dogfight parts of a set, like nothing changes. Like it looks just like the first rep, just slower. So I think with arms, that's been a huge one. It's just basically, the insertion point closer to the origin and visualize it from that perspective when you are lifting with.
Could you give us an example of that, when like a specific exercise and what were you doing before and how's that's changed? Yeah,
so there's been many different, stages of development, mental development. So I used to just curl, it's like, my curls go up, like eventually my arms should grow bigger, but what can happen with curls, eventually it just becomes a full body-ish movement, and you have to remember, it's like if you're bench pressing and your bro touches the bar, that nullifies the rep because a little oomph makes that big of a difference. So like if your heel's kind of like coming up just a little bit when you're curling, If you're throwing a little bit of hip extension in there, a little bit of knees, yeah, that's enough to change what we're trying to actually target here. And again, it's a body part that these are not huge muscle groups, so they don't need a whole lot of weight. So when you take a big joint like, say, the hip, that is kind of throwing itself in there, like that's going to take tension from what you are actually trying to target. So but fast forward to where we're at now. Yeah, basically I visualize like the point A and the point B. My favorite one to learn this on is just like on the cable system, like whether it's a standard just arms to the side, like tricep extension with the rope, or a straight bar curl on a cable setup. And just basically, yeah, imagine point A, point B, and I'm trying to bring those 2 points closer together as I curl. And with that internal cueing, it's just funny. My curls look so different; they feel so different. I cannot use nearly as much weight, but these days I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, I guess.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting. I never heard of it that way. Point A and B and bring them together. It's
yeah,
it's helpful.
yeah. With your chest, I mean, that's what when you're doing your fly, that's what it is. It's like, here's your sternum, it's attached here, and you're
Mm,
just bringing those 2 points closer together on a pec deck, and that's a good contraction.
that's interesting. So sometimes when I do like arms or like isolation movements, I actually think of like Phil Heath's leg going through the leg extension, just because it's easier to visualize because he's got so much muscle than me. Um,
Uh-huh.
I remember one video, and Kevin Levrone used to say, just like think about like the muscle that you work. I know that like it's kind of almost been disproven in the research that, like, muscle, whatever it's called, mind muscle connection, kind of goes away after a certain percentage or whatever of weight lifted. But I did think with the smaller muscle groups, it's helpful, even if it's just to help you with the form. I think about keeping the form rather than if you're doing a hack squat and there's 4 plates, 5 plates on the side, you're going to be working your quads, like, pretty sure, and you're locked in there. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. What about delts then? Like you mentioned, I seen you before using kettlebells. You're probably one of the first people to do kettlebells. Not like kettlebell workout, but like kettlebell lateral raises. And I enjoyed them. A lot of people now are using cuffs. I actually really enjoy using cuffs. Like I don't know why it feels better, but it just feels better. So I'm excited to see what that's going to do for me my next season, because I've been doing a lot of cuffed work. But for delts, what do you say? You said a lot of people perhaps train them incorrectly. Is that a lot of pressing or what?
Mostly just when it comes to just isolation of the lateral head. So lateral raises, there's just so many interpretations of
Yeah.
the lateral. Um, so yeah, I think that the main thing is like sticking in the mid scap area, um, and um, and like, well, you said you like the cuff, and I can see why, because I mean it inserts halfway down your humerus, right? So if you're holding a load in your hand, like how many joints away is that? It's kind of like if you were doing a leg extension and say the pad was on your toes, you know, like you can see how that would be kind of limiting. So the cuff works well. What I really enjoy, and I think most people would just be better off doing it this way, is just find, like, most lateral raise machines put you in a fantastic place.
Yeah.
And where is the resistance coming from? Most of the time is like it's right underneath where that muscle inserts. So that lever arm is now shorter, which what that does is now your loading progressions are a bit easier, because yeah, like again, like there's I guess people would hear that yeah, the lever arm is smaller, so there's, like, I guess, less tension there, but that's or on a per pound basis. But if anything, it's like now you can on your lateral raises on the machine, it's like, hey, you can go from 50 to 60. And the big issue with lateral raises with, say, dumbbells or a kettlebell is just the fact that, like, sometimes you have to use these progressions where maybe you're going from like 8 reps all the way to like 18 reps before you can actually move up to the next increment. And even then, it can be a little iffy, right? Especially you're somewhere in the beginning stages of like lateral raise weight, because going from 20 pounds to 25, like that's a 25% increase in load. You would never do
Yeah.
that with, right?
Mm.
So I think if most people just stuck to lateral raise machines, because they put you in the mid scapular plane, you get a better resistance profile coming out the bottom, and again, like the resistance, it's like right under that muscle, and I think that's convenient for loading.
And is that the same for arms, where like you always like look at form first? What do you see with people doing poorly with lateral raises? Is it going too heavy, or again, a bit of body English?
It's definitely because the same thing. It's like you have all these joints underneath, so that becomes an issue. All these helper muscle groups, all these bros, all these like yes men muscle. They're like, yeah, that's you, man. So I think that, and then most people, they tend to just pick them like right, like straight to their sides. Which what ends up happening is like you kind of impinge right away. Like if your arms are straight to your sides, like this is kind of it. But if you're in the mid scap plane, that's where you have this space, and you can really finish off that movement and get the most range of motion. So yeah, the biggest thing is arms to the sides. There's a lot of people who like partials. So just kind of doing this whole thing here, and you'll feel this intense burn. But and like the research actually follows up on this, and that's, so it's not until you get the free weights until like you get to around 30 degrees in your humeral, in your humerus angle, that basically the lateral delts are really starting to come into play. So these first few inches, it's a lot of the muscles in your rotator essentially that are
All right, yeah.
And that's the burn you feel. So that intense, deep burn that people feel like, this feels so good. Well, it's muscles that, yeah, we do want to train, but just know that that is.
They get trained enough from like pressing and stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And do you program them in any specific way, like at the start of your workouts? Like, do you have like an arm day? And we're talking here in the context of somebody who's like trying to bring up these body parts because they're either weak relative to their overall, say, pose or their body. Would you, do it that way? Would you put them at the beginning of the workout, or have their own day for delts or something like that, or would you hit them more frequently? I know that you kind of said technique is first, but after that, once you got technique nailed down, what do you look at next?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I love the good old upper lower split, or the lower upper split. Kind of depends on what you need. It's kind of like do you guys have like Ford Tauruses out there?
No. What's that?
Not Ford, isn't it? Not Ford. It's a Toyota Camry.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like the car that everyone has. It's just, but it gets you there, man, and it works, and it's time proven. I feel that way about the. It's just not sexy, right? About the upper lower upper splits, but they're just so dynamic in that. Say if you have a lower body that needs to come up, you run the lower upper. You start your week fresh with the lower body. All right. And obviously the stuff you need to do first, you prioritize. But then what it does do, it gives you room to add a fifth day. Because honestly, I think a fifth day of training, if you're doing it right, like sometimes I just wish I could take these people who train 5-6 days a week and just like put them through the ringer. Not necessarily through the ringer, but just have them do shit right. And they'd be like, okay, I can see why in 4 days we're going to need 3 days to recover from this, because the work is just so much better quality. So I think for like 80-90% of people, 4 days a week is like where you're going to see your best results. But when it does come time, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of like mid in level intermediate, and I can kind of start to see what is like going to need a little bit of extra attention, you can go ahead and tack on a fifth day now, where you can really add that work that's very customizable. So again, it's not a sexy plan to sell, but it works so well. It works so well. So for someone who does need, say, arms and delts, but maybe their torso is okay. Yeah, maybe that first workout of the week would be a little bit more arm dominant in some way. while still getting some of the big torso muscle groups. So maybe we close grip bench press, maybe we do dips, maybe we do a lot of underhand rows, but we row. And then at the end of the training session, the less neurologically demanding stuff it would be all our shoulder and arm iso work. And then we'd have a whole day at the end of the week where it's like, hey, guess what you're doing on Friday or Saturday? You're going to be doing shoulders and arms.
Yeah, I actually ran a split like that for about a year when I was in college, I think 2011 or so. I did Jim Wendler's 5-3-1. I did it for like a year or two, and it didn't really have much arm work in it. But I didn't really have great arms just genetically from the front, and it actually worked really well just doing that. The only problem was when you're living abroad in France and you're like it's called Erasmus, but it's exchange, that you go drinking quite a lot on Fridays. So that was like, it's going to be arm day, was really hungover, or else it's not going to be any training. So I don't know if it's that much beneficial, but it's definitely something I'm thinking. I'm just doing a mini cut here, and it's definitely something I'm going to bring back in for my extended off season now, because it's weird because, like you said, from the front, my arms don't look huge, but from the side they're actually quite proportional. My side chest, like my biceps, actually not small. If I do a front double bicep, it actually looks decent. I got a decent hang. It's just from the front, it's the thickness of my arm this way is just not great. So like you said, Martin Daniels, his arms were just like a Flex Wheeler, like from the front. He just hangs out there. But for me, it's like, so what advice would you give me then, other than like to quit bodybuilding?
Don't drink on your arm day.
Yeah.
But
I drank the night before arm day.
There is something to that, to having a day where it's like, these are my weak body parts. Let me kind of mentally connect myself with my goals. And, it's like, today it's going to be delts and it's going to be arms. And look, it might just be a 45-minute session, but you're so locked in and you're there to do what you need to do. And I think, honestly, that probably helps with like the disconnect that a lot of people do feel in the off season, because it's like, it just feels like like some really muddy waters at times,
Yeah. It's not as like arm day is fun, right? So arm and shoulder day is just, you get the pump. You might not get as much if you're doing upper lower. You might, but it's not. The bro splits are fun, right? So they're pretty fun. And I think if you maybe you have a different opinion, but I think if you're top heavy in terms of arms and you have decent legs, you're going to place better in natural bodybuilding, at least, than if you have poor arms and you have good legs. Just, you've got the classic look, and I think that's just rewarded if because natural bodybuilding, there's no classic physique, but you just see it time and time again, guys with just decent legs but not amazing legs, they just look better with bigger arms. It just has that flow to it. I'm not sure what your thoughts.
No, I agree. I think the joke used to be like back in the early 2000s, like natural bodybuilders don't have legs, and come to find out, like, and like speaking of like even more hormonally disadvantaged, right? It's like females, right? It's like usually most of them, when they get in there and they train their legs hard with good technique, full range of motion, they're progressive. They end up developing some really like dope legs, and same thing with like natural bodybuilders. Like most of the time, you see some really good legs on that stage, but it's that guy who has an upper body like Siobhan Cunningham that just like stands out. So no, I agree 100%, 100%. Unfortunately, that's how it is, man. Unfortunately for me, man, because that's my problem.
So have you been working on bringing those up over the last while? Your arms?
I think back a little bit more profusely than arms, but yeah, I might have to throw a little arm day here eventually, just because I feel that the same thing as you in my front relax. It's like when I do this, it's like you can see it's like, man, it's barely thick in my humerus. So they look okay from almost every other angle, but in that front relax, it kills me. And I know the judges can see that.
So when are you planning to, let's say next year there is shows, do you plan to compete or do you want to wait the year after?
If I do next year, it'll probably be the fall, just because all the big shows that's when they happen. So give myself maybe 2 chances to qualify for Worlds. If I can't qualify in 2 goes, then I probably shouldn't be doing Worlds. So that's the angle, and maybe do a few NPC shows. I love doing untested shows just because I don't know, man. It's fun. It's fun to know that you're at a disadvantage, perhaps, and that you're
You
still
have an
doing.
excuse when you don't win.
Yeah. It's like, well, you guys were on sauce, but I find them to be very low stress. They don't really work you on that stage nearly as long.
Yeah.
So really fresh, and you know how it is after like a good natural bodybuilding show. It's like, man, it's like you're more sore than any workout you've done.
Mm. And yeah, I really enjoy actually watching the natural guys like crossover, like when they finish their natural bodybuilding career as well, just to see how they fare, they get on. Like you mentioned Sean earlier. I actually saw you've heard of Richard Godzeki, right?
Yes. I
Yeah,
suspect that was what was going on. The way he worded, he was not very clear, but
yeah,
that's what's up.
yeah. If you retire but you have bigger plans, that kind of means that he's not going to
Mhm.
take up cross country skiing or something. I doubt. So, but it'd be interesting to see because that's always a question that I have. Would this guy who's I think I asked this to Mike Isertel when I met him in person. Like, what his thoughts? Would the best natural bodybuilders be the best pro bodybuilders? I mean, pro IFBB bodybuilders, and vice versa. Personally, I think that the best IFBB pros would probably be better than a lot of the naturals because they actually are not pushed, but they see can make money in it. They see they have a career. Then they take the extra vitamin S, but I don't know. That's why I like seeing the top pros in a natural bodybuilding crossover to see, once they've kind of fulfilled their career. A lot of them do it when they're a bit later, so maybe they don't push themselves in terms of hormonally as hard. But what do you think in terms of that question? Like, would the best be best of either?
You know what? I think a lot of the best natural guys. I think part of the reason that they're there is it's just because things have worked out so well for them. Like that it's never crossed their mind to alter their physiology because it's such a great toy to play with.
Yeah.
Uh, so honestly, I think still some of the best genetics, and this is just because I've seen enough before and afters. I've seen guys that competed at 140, 145 that next time they get on stage are probably going to compete somewhere in the 240s.
Well.
So yeah. So I think the biggest thing that stops a lot of these natural guys is when they do cross over. To them, like coaching's never been that important. Maybe just a few back and forths with guys at their gym. It's like, oh, okay, that's what you do for leg separation. Okay, I'll give that a try. And that's about the extent of like how much they outsource. But when we're talking about drugs now, that's totally different. Like, yeah, there's been, remember Panix Pierre? I think he could have been like one of the best. But once he went over into that side,
He
it
came like
off.
14th or something. I checked. Yeah, like a few years ago, he
Yeah,
did like 14th in I think Classic. Yeah.
it looked off. Like it's like, wow, you lost all your lines. You don't have that same pop. And I think a lot of it's because Panix was really chill. Like back when he was natural, he could trust his physiology to get him through. All you have to do is keep working out, go eat some
Yeah.
protein. I don't even know how many calories you're taking in, to be honest. Um, but hey, that Islander approach is working for you. Whereas
Mm.
I think Sean did it the right way. He surrounded himself with people who know what they're doing. And shoot, Jared, another good example of this. Like I think Jared will be among the top in the sport in like the next 4 to 6 years. And to be honest, that's about how long his climb on the natural side of things probably would have taken. So yeah, I think a lot of the really gifted guys, like Baba, like if you were it's probably never crossed his mind because it's such a fun toy. It's
Yeah.
like what's wrong with a stock Ferrari? It's like I don't want to change nothing, you know.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, just thinking of like, just to go back to the guy Kendall who won the overall. He's. I remember seeing he said he coached himself. You'd never get like top 10 Olympia guys saying they coach themselves. They always have coaches in their corner the whole time, whether it's Hani Rambod or whoever it is at the time. You know,
In the coach, like to be honest, is like most of those times, I wouldn't trust them to do strength training for like a high school football team. You know,
yeah, they're
so,
the
like,
farmers, ecologists.
they're there for
Part
other
time.
reasons. Yeah. So, but yeah, in the natural side, most of the guys that are really talented, it's like it's funny because they'll get all these things from like the casual bodybuilding fan about how they couldn't be natural, and I'm like, dude, this guy doesn't care because literally he does his show. He's 5'9". He's 190 pounds on stage, and yeah, he's a manager at Walmart. Like,
Yeah,
there's no incentive here, you know.
exactly. Yeah, I was chatting to a guy in the gym he's African, but he's like Irish citizen, and he's a BNBF pro, but he never competed with the INBF. So I won the Ireland show last year, but this guy would smoke me if he competed. He's in his 40s, but he was like, we were chatting in the gym and he was like doing an exercise, but he's bulking, but he's doing drop sets to shred the glutes as he's bulking. So I'm like, and he does security. I mean, like if this guy, like, I don't know how much he could, like a lot of it's just like hard work, consistency, and just, you know, showing up every day basically. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. So are you going to be, you're obviously not going to be able to travel to WNBF Worlds this year. There's no travel, right? Is there? I don't know.
I think there's no worlds. Is there
Oh,
worlds?
well.
There might be.
Oh, cancelled?
I don't know. I thought they were canceled, but no, not traveling. I can, but I can't travel within the U.S. But no worlds. A lot of the overseas teams, and we depend on them so much to like bring some of the best competition. Like it's just not going to work, you know. So yeah, the Brits, man, the Spaniards, the Italians, like it's just crazy what comes out of Europe. So so without them, it's just not going to be, even if there is a Worlds, which I've not confirmed. So apologies there, but yeah, this won't be the same.
So anyway, man, it was great to chat to you again. Thanks for coming on. It's definitely an interesting topic. I love to chat all this natural bodybuilding. It's not often that we get to just sit down and just shoot natural bodybuilding for a while.
Yeah, and just casual fan talk. I think it's my favorite, man, because you can't have this combo with just about anyone.
Yeah.
Like and even with most competitors, it's like there's that like guy that competes, and then there's that guy that it's like I live and eat and breathe this stuff, and it's always cooler when someone
Are you a fan of untested bodybuilding? Do you watch that at all?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
tested or no, untested, open body, IFBB bodybuilding.
I do. I'm not a huge fan of the 212 division just yet. Just because I guess there's some about the caps that I like and I don't like when it comes to, you know, the height. I think they're going to keep moving them up until it just becomes open, and then eventually they're just going to get rid of the trunk. So I think honestly,
you mean classic division, not 212.
The classic, yeah. I think at some point, which again it's beautiful bodybuilding, but it's just so convoluted at this point to me, where it's just like the open is
yeah. It's the same as the men's physique. They just get bigger and bigger. There's a guy actually in England that won an NPC show. He's a classic. He's an IFBB pro now. So I think it's good to see that. His name's Bob Waterhouse. It's interesting to see. You know, there is an option there for IFBB, but they're just going to get smoked if you're thinking about the Chris Swumps there. Like these guys are like what 220 or something on stage. So
yeah. You know what, the men's physique was like I think their first attempt to just clean up and fix some of the things that went wrong with the open at a certain point, and then that started kind of getting like to look a bit like freakier. than they anticipated. Because Gen 1, like men's physique guys, are like, wow, really? Like, really? It's just so different. And then, honestly, just what I think would be a great solution is like if they had like those weight caps in the open, because I think for a lot of guys, it just puts them in a position where it is a game of chicken, and that's kind of unfortunate. Where it's just like, I'm gonna do what it takes to be better at my sport, and sometimes, when you're kind of caught up in the heat of competition, and this is your livelihood, it's like, okay, you're going to redline and take some of the stuff in amounts that maybe a version of you 10 years from now wouldn't necessarily agree. So
Yeah.
I just more skill when it's like, okay, if you're 5'10", this is going to be as big as we let you get, and you're gonna have to find other ways to get better. It's like, come in, fix your posing, redistribute muscle a little bit, things like that. And I think that just makes the game so much more interesting, because it did get to a point there with the open bodybuilding where, if we were just looking at silhouettes of the guys, just across the board, they all kind of look the same.
It's just mass. That's all you're looking at. And you start to lose kind of the shape a little bit in the midsection as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, dude, it's been great to chat to you. Thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, no, right on, man. Appreciate you having me. And
where can people find more about you and the work you do?
So 3dmusclejourney.com. That's where you can literally find not just all my stuff, but all the team stuff. We have things in archive like back many years. We have a YouTube channel. We're all pretty active on Instagram. So, but that website is like gonna basically point you in the right direction to all the little nook and crannies of stuff we put out there. We pride ourselves on trying to be good educators, so definitely worth checking out.
And I saw you got shadow banned on Instagram, so you obviously not pleasing the overlords.
I've been shadow banned for 2 years, man. I don't know what I did.
Yeah, so you mixed it up with your OnlyFans account.
I think I might have uploaded a picture. I've yet to do that. I've heard horror stories. Cardi B story, right?
Oh, saw that.
Yeah, I've heard stories, but no, it's yet to happen. But we'll make a comeback. I'm gonna get so shredded next time I compete that it's just gonna break through the shadow ban. That's the goal.
Awesome, man. Thanks again.
Hey, right on, man. Good talking to you, dude.